Before fireworks, countdowns, and overpriced champagne, the arrival of a new year used to make people genuinely uncomfortable. Today we see January 1st as a reset button, but for most of history, it felt more like opening a letter you were afraid to read. Imagine staying up all night, not to celebrate, but because you were worried something terrible might happen when the calendar flipped over. That uneasy feeling was not superstition or pessimism for the sake of it, because for many people, the new year came with very real consequences. New laws, new debts, new punishments, and sometimes even angry gods were believed to show up right on schedule. So today we are diving into 5 historical reasons people used to dread the new year. And by the end, you might feel a little more grateful for your boring resolutions. We are starting thousands of years ago, long before January 1st meant anything at all. Reason 1. The new year meant judgment from the gods. In ancient Mesopotamia, the new year was not about personal growth, but about survival and divine approval. Every spring, people celebrated a massive festival known as a Kitu, which marked the start of a new year and the rebirth of the world. This festival lasted more than a week and involved parades, rituals, prayers, and a whole lot of anxiety. The reason people were anxious was because they believed the gods used this moment to decide the fate of the coming year. If the gods were pleased, crops would grow, floods would behave, and enemies would stay away. If the gods were angry, well, that year was going to be rough in ways people could not easily fix. The king himself was dragged into this process, and his experience made the stakes very clear. During the festival, the king was stripped of his symbols of power and brought before a high priest. The priest would slap the king across the face and force him to confess his failures and mistakes. If the king cried, that was considered a good sign because it meant the gods were forgiving. If he did not cry, people worried the gods had already made up their minds. Imagine starting a new year knowing your ruler had just been publicly humiliated to appease unseen forces. For everyday people, this ritual was a reminder that the future was out of their hands. The new year was not a blank page, but a verdict that had already been written somewhere in the heavens. Reason 2. The new year was when debts came due. Fast forward to ancient Rome, where the new year came with a very different kind of fear. Instead of worrying about gods and omens, people worried about money, contracts, and legal trouble. For Romans, the new year was closely tied to financial obligations and civic duties. Debts were often expected to be paid at the start of the year, whether you were ready or not. That meant January was a terrifying month if you owed money and had no way to pay it back. Failing to settle debts could result in public shame, loss of property, or even enslavement. The calendar did not care if your harvest failed or your business struggled. When the year changed, the bill collectors showed up anyway. On top of that, Roman officials often began their terms at the new year. New leadership meant new rules, new taxes, and sometimes new enemies. Ordinary people had no idea whether the coming year would be fair or brutally corrupt. So while the elite exchanged gifts and offered sacrifices, many others were quietly panicking. The new year was not about hope, but about bracing yourself for whatever Rome decided to throw at you. Reason 3. The calendar change could ruin your life. Medieval Europe added another layer of stress by refusing to agree on when the new year even started. Depending on where you lived, the year might begin in March, September, or even on a religious holiday. This confusion was not just annoying, because it had serious legal consequences. Contracts, taxes, and court decisions depended on the official start of the year. If you thought the year had already changed, but the authorities disagreed, you could be in serious trouble. A debt you believed was overdue might suddenly still be valid. A deadline you thought had passed might suddenly be enforceable again. People could lose land, money, or legal protection simply because calendars did not line up. To make matters worse, record-keeping was inconsistent and often controlled by local powers. That meant the new year could be used as a convenient excuse to exploit people. The uncertainty turned each new year into a bureaucratic minefield. Instead of celebrating, people worried about whether time itself was about to betray them. Reason 4. The new year was linked to punishment and doom. In some cultures, the new year was associated with danger, violence, and cosmic chaos. Ancient beliefs often describe the turning of the year as a moment when order was temporarily weakened. Spirits, monsters, or angry forces were thought to roam more freely during this time. This idea shows up in traditions where loud noises, masks, or fires were used to scare away evil. The problem was that people genuinely believed these dangers were real. A mistake during the New Year rituals could invite bad luck for months or even years. Some societies even scheduled executions or punishments around the New Year. This turned the date into a symbol of endings, not beginnings. For prisoners or social outcasts, the New Year could mean final judgment instead of renewal. While a few celebrated survival, others counted down their remaining hours. The idea of a fresh start felt very different when the stakes were life and death. Reason 5. The New Year reminded people of how little control they had. Across many societies, the New Year forced people to confront uncertainty in a very direct way. Weather, war, disease, and politics could all shift with terrifying speed. The calendar change did not promise improvement, only change. For farmers, one bad season could mean starvation. For families, one outbreak of illness could erase generations of stability. The New Year highlighted how fragile life really was. Instead of making resolutions, people focused on appeasing forces they could not control. Rituals were less about optimism and more about damage control. Hope existed, but it was cautious and deeply tied to fear. The turning of the year was a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Why the New Year feels different today. Over time, calendars became standardized and laws became more predictable. Governments slowly took over roles once assigned to gods and rituals. While life is still uncertain, the New Year no longer carries immediate punishment or judgment. That shift completely changed how people emotionally experience the date. What was once feared slowly became symbolic. Today, we project meaning onto the new year instead of having it forced upon us. We still feel pressure, but it usually comes from ourselves, not from priests or kings. The dread never fully disappeared. It just transformed into anxiety about goals and time passing. In a strange way, that makes modern New Year stress a distant echo of something very old. The difference is that now we can choose celebration instead of fear. So the next time the countdown begins, remember that history had far worse plans for this moment. Compared to divine judgment and debt collectors, a bad resolution is not so scary after all. And that might be the real reason the new year finally feels worth celebrating.